I have full confidence in Catherine and William. Their judgment is sound, their loyalty unquestioned.
The room did not erupt. It froze. One royal sentence, delivered with calm finality, changed the balance of the family forever. King Frederick of Aldenmark stood before the senior household and announced that Crown Prince Soren and Princess Leora would assume the central powers of royal family leadership, while Queen Consort Alandra would lose any future family title, ceremonial standing, and internal authority. For Alandra, the words did not sound like administration. They sounded like exile. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal house of Aldenmark, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Alandra did not move. She did not speak. Her fingers tightened together in her lap as the silence around her grew heavier than any accusation could have been. Frederick had not raised his voice, and that made the moment even more devastating. The king had spoken in the careful tone of a man who knew every word would be remembered, but his face carried the strain of someone tearing through a bond that had once seemed untouchable. The senior household meeting, a private gathering where the monarch, close family members, and trusted advisors discuss sensitive royal matters before they become public, had begun with controlled formality. Yet within minutes, it became the most painful turning point of his reign. Frederick understood what the new authority structure meant. It was not just a scheduled change or a ceremonial reshuffle. It was the planned transfer of influence, public responsibility, and private decision-making power inside the family. Soren would no longer stand only as the heir waiting for his time. The prince would now help shape the family's direction from the center. Leora would no longer be seen merely as the loyal wife beside him. The princess had become part of the new emotional and practical core of the monarchy, and Alandra, still seated before them, had just heard that her future place inside that structure had been removed completely. Soren lowered his eyes, and that single movement carried more force than triumph ever could. He knew this was power arriving through fracture, and the future king did not look victorious. He looked burdened. Leora remained still beside him, her silence steady but not cold, as though she understood that authority gained during another woman's humiliation could never feel clean. Alandra finally looked toward Frederick, waiting for softness, waiting for a sentence that might turn the blade away. But the king gave her none. His choice had already been made. The silence revealed the question no one dared speak. Why now? Why so suddenly? Why had Frederick chosen this moment to place Soren and Leora in power and leave Alandra with no title, no standing, and no path back into the family's inner circle? But before anyone could understand why Alandra had been stripped of her place, they had to understand who stood to lose everything, and who had just inherited the burden of control. Power does not move through a monarchy like paper across a desk. It moves through faces, wounds, and private histories. In that room, Frederick was not only a king. Alandra was not only a consort. Soren was not only an heir. Leora was not only his wife. Each of them carried a different fear, and when the announcement landed, every fear became visible at once. Frederick felt the weight first. He stood before them as the king, but his voice carried the pain of a husband who knew the sentence had already wounded the woman seated across from him. The monarchy, the institution that survives through duty, public trust, and controlled family order, could not keep moving forward while old tensions shaped every private decision. Frederick understood that affection could no longer be allowed to guide the future. Survival had become stronger than comfort, and that truth sat on his face before anyone dared name it. Alandra felt erased in the cruelest way possible. She had not been challenged in public. She had not been corrected in front of crowds. She had been removed inside a private room where every person understood the meaning before the words had finished landing. The queen consort looked toward Frederick, then away, as if the familiar walls had suddenly become strange to her. She was not only losing influence, she was losing belonging, and that loss cut deeper than any title could explain. Soren watched his father avoid her eyes. The prince noticed it immediately, and the small gesture told him the decision had not been made in panic. Frederick had rehearsed this. The king had carried it into the room long before anyone heard it aloud. That made the moment colder, not louder. Soren did not look relieved. He looked unsettled, because power had just moved toward him through a family wound that might never fully close. Leora carried her own silence carefully. The princess understood that her rise beside Soren would be judged against Elandra's fall, and that made the honor feel heavier than victory. She remained calm but not untouched. She knew the family needed stability, and she knew the public trusted her steady presence. Yet she also knew that another woman's humiliation had become the doorway to her own authority, and that truth followed her into every breath. A senior aide closed the leather folder with quiet finality. That sound changed the room. The folder suggested structure, preparation, and a decision backed by more than emotion. Soren heard it and understood something chilling. This was not merely Frederick choosing between people. Something behind the scenes had forced the king's hand, and the deeper the family looked into that decision, the clearer it became that the breaking point had not happened that morning. It had begun with one private incident no one could forget. Every royal crisis has a moment people later point to and whisper. That was when it changed. For this family, it was not a speech, a scandal, or a public argument. It was a private dinner at Aldenholm Castle 6 weeks earlier, when Elandra challenged Leora's role in front of senior relatives and questioned whether Soren should be trusted with family authority before the crown had fully passed to him. Elandra spoke as if she were asking a careful question, but everyone at the table felt the edge beneath it. The Aldenholm dinner, a private family gathering held inside the royal residence for close relatives to discuss duties away from public pressure, had been arranged to calm fears about the future. Instead, it exposed them. The family had gathered to speak about future royal duties, meaning the roles each senior figure would carry as Frederick's reign moved forward and as Soren prepared for greater responsibility. That was why the moment mattered. It was not casual talk. It was about who would guide the family next. Leora stayed composed, but the stillness hurt. She heard Elandra question whether her place beside Soren had grown too large too soon. The princess did not answer with anger. She answered with control, and that made the room even colder. Leora knew that if she defended herself too sharply, the moment would become a fight. If she stayed silent, the insult would hang in the air. So she chose silence, and that silence told Soren everything. Soren felt the heat rise in him, but he held it down. The prince looked toward Elandra, then toward Frederick, because the king was watching every movement. Soren understood that one uncontrolled sentence could split the table in half. He wanted to protect Leora, yet he also knew the future king could not appear wounded by every challenge. So he said less than he felt, and that restraint became its own warning. Frederick noticed the room shift. It did not shift through outrage. It shifted through discomfort. Relatives looked away. A fork was set down. A pause lasted too long. Elandra had not only questioned Leora, she had forced everyone to see that divided authority would follow the family into every future decision. The king said little at the table, but his silence had changed by the end of the meal. His sister, Duchess Rosalind, later spoke to Frederick in a private conversation, according to an account later shared by a family secretary. The Duchess told him the family could survive disagreement, but it could not survive two centers of control pulling against each other. Frederick heard the warning, and the king knew she was right. That dinner became the hidden fuse beneath the announcement that left Elandra speechless. Once Frederick understood that private tension had become a threat to the family's future, the next step was no longer discussion. It was confrontation. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with the door closing. Frederick asked everyone to leave, and for the first time that morning, Elandra was not facing courtiers, aides, or future monarchs. She was facing the man whose name had protected her for years. On the table between them sat the written decision, but the Real wound was not in the paper. It was in his voice. Elandra looked at Frederick as if she were waiting for the king to take the words back. He did not. The written decision, a formal palace record confirming a change in role, authority, and future family standing, rested between them like a final barrier. It mattered because this was no longer emotional talk. It was no longer a private disagreement that could be softened later. The decision confirmed that Elandra would lose any future family title, meaning the name and position that gave her ceremonial recognition inside the royal household, and she would lose internal authority, meaning the power to shape private family planning. Frederick kept his hand near the document, but he did not touch it. Alandra asked him the question that had been forming since the announcement landed. Had the family decided she no longer belonged? The queen consort tried to keep her voice steady, but the pain broke through before the sentence ended. Frederick looked down for a moment, and that pause wounded her more than a quick answer could have done. The king wanted mercy in his words, but mercy could not change what he had already done. Alandra pushed harder. She said Soren and Leora had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the old order to collapse so they could step into power without resistance. Frederick lifted his head. Then the accusation reached something deeper in him. He told her the prince had not asked for her humiliation, and the princess had not built her future on cruelty. Soren had carried restraint when anger would have been easier. Leora had carried dignity when triumph would have looked stronger. Frederick admitted what Alandra did not want to hear. The monarchy could not afford another generation of private rivalry becoming public weakness. The king said the family had already suffered from divided loyalties, wounded trust, and whispered battles behind closed doors. He would not leave Soren and Leora to inherit the same poisoned structure. Alandra stared at him, and the silence between them hardened. Frederick reached for his pen, then stopped. He placed it down beside the document instead of signing another note, and the gesture said everything. Nothing more was being negotiated. Nothing more was being softened. Alandra understood then that power had moved beyond her reach, and Frederick had chosen not to call it back. And once Alandra understood that Frederick would not reverse course, the question became sharper. Who truly held the power behind this decision? The most powerful person in the room is not always the one raising their voice. Sometimes it is the one who says the least and changes everything by standing still. As the palace adjusted to Frederick's announcement, Leora became the quiet center of the new order. She did not demand authority. She accepted it with the kind of restraint that made everyone else understand why it had been given. Leora felt the weight before she felt the power. The princess knew this decision would not be seen as simple duty by everyone watching from inside the family. Shared practical influence meant that she and Soren would now help guide family representation, ceremonial planning, and internal royal unity. In plain words, they would help decide how the royal family appeared, gathered, and protected its public image. That mattered because the monarchy could not afford confusion at the top. It also mattered because Alandra's removal had created pain that no official language could hide. Soren found Leora in the corridor after the meeting, and the prince saw the worry she was trying to bury. She told him quietly that people would say she had won. He answered that duty sometimes arrives through pain, and he said it with the tired honesty of a man who knew victory was the wrong word. Soren understood that Leora had not asked to rise through Alandra's fall. The princess understood it too, and that made her new role heavier, not easier. Frederick framed the transfer as protection, not punishment. The king told the senior household that the monarchy needed one clear emotional center, one steady public image, and one future-facing structure before private rivalries became public damage again. A transfer of authority, the movement of responsibility from one person or group to another, had to look deliberate, not cruel. Frederick wanted everyone to understand that Soren and Leora were not being used as weapons against Alandra. They were being placed where the future already needed them. A senior private secretary later confirmed, in an account shared internally, that Frederick had asked for a transition plan days before the announcement. That detail changed everything. The king had not acted in sudden anger. He had prepared. The palace had prepared. Soren realized then that the decision had been moving quietly beneath the surface, while everyone else was still pretending there might be time to repair the damage. Alandra's name began disappearing from future family planning documents almost immediately. A schedule was revised. A ceremony list was changed. A private seating note was replaced. Leora saw the changes and did not smile. Soren read them and grew still. Power had left the announcement behind and entered the machinery of royal life. Because the moment power shifted from words into action, Alandra was forced to confront the new reality in the most personal way possible. The next morning hurt more than the announcement. Announcements can feel unreal. Consequences do not. Alandra entered her office expecting the familiar rhythm of royal life. Schedules, briefings, signatures, quiet authority. Instead, She found empty spaces where her future duties had been removed. A chair had been moved away from the planning table. A nameplate had vanished, and for the first time, the silence belonged to her. Alandra stared at the reduced schedule before she touched it. The schedule, the daily list of royal duties, meetings, briefings, and ceremonial responsibilities, had always told her where she belonged inside the working rhythm of the family. Now it told her where she no longer belonged. Her name had been removed from future family ceremony briefings, meaning the private planning meetings that decide who attends, who stands where, and who carries visible importance during royal events. That mattered because the removal was not symbolic anymore. It had entered the daily machinery. A junior aide stepped forward with the papers, then hesitated. That hesitation wounded Alandra more than the papers themselves. The queen consort saw the fear in the aide's face, the careful politeness, the quiet knowledge that everyone already understood her reduced place. She accepted the schedule without a word, but her fingers tightened around the page. Yesterday, the decision had sounded like thunder. Today, it felt like being slowly erased line by line. Frederick heard about the office changes before noon. The king closed his eyes for a moment when the private secretary explained how quickly the staff had adjusted. He felt the pain of it, but not regret. Frederick knew speed was necessary because hesitation would invite confusion, and confusion would invite resistance. The monarchy needed clarity after the announcement. Still, the man behind the crown understood what clarity had cost Alandra, and that knowledge sat heavily on him. Soren received the revised family authority file later that morning. The prince paused before opening it because he already knew what each page would prove. A family authority file, the working record of who holds influence over private planning, ceremony, and representation, was not dramatic in appearance, but it carried real power. Soren opened it slowly and saw Alandra's future role reduced again and again. The future king did not smile. He understood that his own rise had become tied to her fall. Leora saw the vacant place on his seating plan and stopped. The princess quietly asked that no one speak cruelly about it. Her words changed the mood around the table. Leora understood that strength did not mean enjoying another woman's collapse. Alandra had lost power, but she did not need to be stripped of dignity too. And that truth leads to the one private meeting no title, no aid, and no palace rule could control. No guard stood between them. No secretary softened the words. No husband spoke on either woman's behalf. Leora entered the small sitting room alone, knowing Alandra might see her as the face of everything she had lost. Alandra did not rise at first. She looked at the younger woman with a wounded stillness, and for several seconds the monarchy disappeared. Only 2 women remained. Leora had asked for the meeting after seeing how quickly the palace moved around Alandra. The sitting room felt stripped of protection, because no Frederick, no Soren, and no aides were there to turn pain into careful language. That mattered because this was not about official wording anymore. A private conversation, a direct exchange without staff, statements, or royal procedure, gave both women no place to hide. Leora knew Alandra had been removed from power, but she also knew removal could become cruelty if no one stopped the family from treating humiliation like victory. Alandra spoke first, and her voice carried more bitterness than anger. She asked Leora whether she had come to witness the defeat. The queen consort did not soften the word defeat. She said it as if the whole morning had been designed to make her small. Leora absorbed the accusation without flinching, because the princess understood why Alandra felt cornered. The younger woman had gained authority at the exact moment the older woman had lost it, and no gentle phrase could make that truth disappear. Leora answered quietly. She said she had not come to enjoy anything. She had come because humiliation should never become entertainment, even inside a palace. Those words shifted the room. Alandra looked away, but she listened. Leora did not pretend the decision would change. She did not offer false comfort. The princess simply made clear that power did not require cruelty, and that dignity could remain even after authority had gone. Alandra finally admitted what she had not said to Frederick. She had never feared losing public approval as much as losing her place inside the family. The queen consort said the crown had always been heavy, but being unwanted by the people closest to it felt heavier. Leora heard the confession and understood the wound beneath the pride. Elandra was not only angry because she had lost control. She was grieving because control had once made her feel safe. Leora made one promise. She would not restore what Frederick had taken, and she would not challenge Soren's new authority. But she would not allow Elandra to be mocked inside the family's walls. The queen consort did not thank her, not yet, but her silence changed. That quiet promise shaped how the palace would face the